Welcome to this very special session in the curriculum fair for 2026. I am joined by Whitney Hardcastle and April Ashton, who are going to be taking us through a workshop on curriculum and instruction focused on assessments and responding to data in ELA. So I am going to delay no further and go ahead and give them the floor to take us into it.
All right, thank you, Kaylee. Like Kaylee said, I'm Whitney. I'm joined here by April Ashton. We are members of the professional learning team. And today's agenda, we are going to be starting with an overview of the different types. Well, first, we're going to do some overview of what's going on, and we're going to do some intention setting around our outcomes of today's workshop. Then we're going to jump into our overview of the different types of assessments we have here at Visions, and we're going to have a little discussion piece around that. And then we'll look at some actual student scenarios and some student data that you might get from those assessments and dig into those scenarios a little farther. And then we will have an intentional and reflective closing. So our outcomes today, we're hoping that you're able to identify patterns in ELA student data to better understand where they might need additional support and determine what the next steps would help them to grow as readers and writers. We want to help you guide conversations around that data with students and families. We want to make sure we're identifying how to find helpful resources, suggesting different types of scaffolds, and asking meaningful questions that support that learning at home. And while we're doing this, we want you to keep in mind your student or one of your students, if you're one of our educators here, of who is going to benefit from this work today. So we want to keep those conversations really reflective and student-centered about data. We do want to revisit our four critical questions. These are the four critical questions of our professional learning communities. And today we're going to be really focused on question number 2. Question number 2 is, how do we know that they've learned it? And we know what they've learned through assessments. So the first two big types of assessments that I want to go over are our formative and our summative assessments. Formative assessments, we love this analogy of soup. That's when the chef is tasting the soup along the way, and after each taste can make little adjustments as needed based on that taste. The summative or the final assessment would be when the guests get to taste the soup. So I'm going to turn it over to April right now, and she's going to go over how these assessments show up here at Visions.
Thanks, Whitney. Get my screen to, there we go. So we want to kind of balance. I love this image here of the scale because we don't want too much in the way of formative, and we also don't want too much in summative. We're kind of looking for that Goldilocks just right balance. Formative assessments, those are really helpful in terms of guiding and understanding the learning that's occurring in real time. And that summative assessment is really that kind of that end piece of looking at the conclusion of that unit or that chapter, what did they come away with in that learning? This is where we see assessments within Visions, depending on what curriculum you're using. So we have Lincoln Learning Beyond the Page, EL, R Math, and Zern Math, for example, here on those various types. They have different names for those formative and summative assessments. And then we have common formative assessments, which we're beginning in terms of a couple each learning period with your CT. And then we have our district level benchmark assessments that we have at the beginning of the year, the middle of the year, and then at the end of the year, as well as those big external assessments that we do through the state, such as CASP, CAST, LPAC, or the PFT. These are examples of 3 types of assessments you might see within our curriculum, the EL, Beyond the Page, and Lincoln Learning. So they'll kind of look different based on those curriculum, but they're all really the same. They're trying to help us gauge where are our students in that process of their learning. What kind of feedback are we getting? Are they struggling? Do we need to revisit? Or are they showing strength and they're ready to move on the next steps?
All right, so since April has told us what we have here at Visions, we're going to go over the why, the purpose of what we do with these assessments and why we do them. And then we're going to talk about where those show up within our system or where you've seen it. So that's going to be our discussion piece. So the first type of assessment that April touched on is our common formative assessments. You might hear them, the acronym CFA around them. And their purpose is that teachers are going to administer these along learning instruction to check whether students have learned any of the essential learning targets and understand where they're at. So this could be if we need to go back in. So this would be the tasting of the soup. Do we need to go back and make any adjustments? Are we ready to move forward? So here's where the discussion piece comes in play. If you've seen a common formative assessment, we'd like for you to either come off mute or you can answer in the chat if they are more comfortable typing of when and where you think this assessment shows up in Visions or if you have seen this. Usually embedded in part of the curriculum. So the CFAs show up and they're typically given by the CT during the LP meetings. We have been using the system Wayground this year, and then that data is shared with families and students. Awesome. Our next type of assessment is our summative assessment. The purpose that summative assessments serve, like the soup analogy, these are usually at the end of the unit to check whether students can put all of their skills and concepts together that were taught during that unit. So this usually guides our Tier 2 support. Is there a time that you see summative assessments within Visions? Feel free to use the chat again, that worked perfectly. Awesome. I'm seeing end of unit tests. Donna, we will get to iReady. Our summative assessments, though, are typically in the core curriculum. So they're the unit assessments that come with the curriculum and then are given at the end of that unit. But Donna's ready for our next one. Our next type of assessment is our benchmark assessments. The purpose of our benchmark assessments is what we want to administer these periodically throughout the year to check if students are making progress towards the end of the year standards. So this can also help identify Tier 2 support, and these are like little check-ins periodically, not periodically, but usually beginning, middle, and end of the year. And so, have you seen any of these types of examples in Visions? Yeah. iReady, awesome. Thank you. iReady diagnostics are a great example of benchmark assessments, and that is where they show up here within our system. Our next type of assessment are our state and national tests. The purpose behind these is of these assessments, they measure our overall student learning, the effectiveness of our pacing, our curriculum and instructional strategies, so we get to see at the end of the year where they're at. Have you seen any examples of these at Visions, our state and national tests? Yep. So we have our CASP testing that measures growth, well, measures our end of the year, how much we've learned in math and English language arts. We have CAST, which is our science test, our LPAC, which is an English proficiency test for our multi-language learners, and then we also have our physical fitness testing that we measure for the state. Our next type of assessment is a universal screener. The purpose of the universal screener is we want to administer these assessments early in the year to identify if any students are significantly below grade level so they can get our most intensive support, which would be Tier 3 support. So have you seen any examples or when they show up in visions of a universal screener? RDRS, yep. And maybe you guys are familiar with Amira if you have a younger student. The Amira is our reading risk screener that we use. And then our last type of assessment is our classroom formative assessments. These are what teachers administer during instruction to check whether students have learned it and learned what they're teaching. And these are usually little quick checks for understanding. So have you seen any examples of these? Yeah, exit tickets are a great example. These are also just little formative assessments that are done during the instruction so the educator knows if the student is understanding or not. So this could be as simple as a one question or something more formal like an exit ticket at the end of a lesson. That's a great example. So jumping down to continuing our discussion, were any of these assessments familiar to you? You can go ahead and type the name of the assessment in the chat, or you can come off mute if this was a familiar assessment to you. Perfect. If you are a CT or an educator in our system, hopefully these all are familiar to you and you are utilizing them. But if you are utilizing them, what do these assessments help us understand about a student's learning? Which one do you find the most useful? And what data are you using from them? Love it. The common formative assessment. So that's that tasting of the soup. And when we get that data, it does help us inform instruction and we can make those adjustments as needed, as we know our students are learning. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to April, who's going to jump into some scenarios right now.
All right, thanks, Whitney. I am going to read through a student scenario here about Zane. And as we are reading through this scenario, I'm going to move back here because I'm going to be asking what kind of information do we have? What information maybe do we not have in this scenario? And what are you curious about to learn more? And how could we better support this student? So kind of keep those questions in mind. So Zane is a first grader working in Lincoln Learning who attends synchronous instruction regularly. His recent AMIR report places him in the catch-up range with a ARM, so that stands for AMIR Reading Mastery score of negative 0.02, performing better than 6% of students nationally. Subscores also fall in the catch-up range across foundational areas, including decoding, phonological awareness, high-frequency words, structure and reasoning, vocabulary, and background knowledge. So while Zane participates in discussions and demonstrates understanding when text is read aloud to him, the data indicates significant foundational skill gaps that are impacting his independence with the Lincoln Learning curriculum. So I'm going to pause right now just to let you read through that to kind of go back, think of those questions that we're going to turn to next. Okay. So you can either use the chat or unmute yourself. What information do we have about Zane from this assessment data? I'm going to flip back. Maybe it will help. What do we know? What are we given? Okay, when I read through this scenario, I see that, yeah, okay, I'm seeing that Zane can understand grade level texts when he's listening to them. Yes. So as long as someone's helping to support and someone is reading aloud, he's able to engage. He needs some extra help with reading, especially in those foundational skills. Yes, that is for sure what we know from this data. What do we maybe don't know? What are you wondering about? What would you, if you were given this scenario, you'd probably question or try to find out some more information to help support you. Okay, what curriculum he uses? Okay. Yeah, what does that mean? What does independence look like within Lincoln Learning? What's his educational background? Maybe other assessment. Yeah, if you want to maybe go ahead and like layer the different assessments, maybe we're going to be looking at iReady scores in addition to the AmeriData scores. Um, do we know what sounds those letters say? Yeah, so maybe more specifically, kind of like narrowing down in terms of we know that there were sub-scores on those decoding areas in the phonological awareness, but what specifically are those areas that he may need some extra support in? So we don't really quite have that. Any curiosities or further wonderings in addition to what we just discussed? Does he know what sounds the letters say? That'd be going back to the basics, right? Just like, okay, what does he know? What is he really good at already? How do we build from there? And then how could we support the student given the assessment data that we've received? Good. Yeah. What does a typical day look like? Right. Is there consistency in that instruction? How would you support this student? Yeah. Kind of assessing the learning environment, further support and phonological awareness. Yes. Key skill. Right? Because we can take all that data and be able to kind of put it together, and that really does now it helps us as educators with the student to know how to best specifically dial in and support that student in those specific areas. Foundation, yes, on those foundational skills, absolutely. Okay, so we're going to now turn to a different student, a little older, Maya. And Maya is a third grader working in a different curriculum, so not Lincoln Learning in the Open Up EL education curriculum. She also attends synchronous boost classes regularly. So in our system, synchronous instruction boost are those tier 2 support or potentially tier 3 support classes. So when I say tier 2 or tier 3, those are just some additional, more, I would say, intervention type classes to help get the skills back up to closer to grade level so they can return back on par with their colleagues and fellow students here on those skill sets. So she is attending those synchronous instruction boost classes regularly. However, recent reading data indicates that she's approximately 1 to 2 grade levels below expectation. With the Open Up curriculum, Maya participates in grade level discussions when the texts are read aloud, but struggles to independently access complex module texts and complete those written tasks. Her comprehension improves with scaffolds, such as chunked text, pre-taught vocabulary, indicating that her fluency and her decoding gaps are limiting her ability to really fully engage with the grade level content. So we're giving a lot of information here about Maya. What stood out to you? What do we know about this student? Because she has some strengths. Yeah, sure. I can go back. No problem. Hmm. Yeah, she has great comprehension, right? When someone's reading out loud to her, she's able to engage with the text. Listening comprehension skills, um, a strength. Okay. What else do we know also in terms of areas that she may need some support? Yes, she is below grade level. We know about 1 to 2 grade levels below, according to the data. hmm She can read grade level text if there's scaffold, so those supports in place. So chunking, like so making it smaller text instead of a big, large text. And yes, pre-teaching that vocabulary, which may indicate that she maybe a little lower in that, having that background in vocabulary to move forward independently with that text. But with those scaffolds in place, she is successful. Okay. Based on what we know from this data and her strengths in some areas, what are some things that you have questions about? What would you want to know more about? I'm going to go ahead and also combine that. How would you support this student? Yes. Yeah. It looks like she needs some support with her decoding and that fluency. If we can get those up to grade level with her being able to have that comprehension and that oral engagement, we probably will be able to see her be quite successful with that grade level text. Yeah, it's continuing to assess and monitor for sure. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move away from our scenarios. I'm going to turn this back to Whitney.
So, reflecting on the scenarios and the different types of assessments we've seen, was there anything that stood out to you, any datas or situations, or do you see any possibilities for supporting either your own students or the students in the scenarios' growth? Awesome. Yeah, looking at that whole picture and really digging in to make sure we have all the assessments. Are we fully answering question number 2 of the 4 critical questions? How do we know that they've learned it? And what is all the pieces of the puzzle that fit together? Awesome. Well, we also want to invite you to our family learning communities. These are a year-long coaching opportunity for our family partners to learn more about best practices in the curriculum here at Visions. This assessment piece, a lot of it is from one of our family community sessions. And we'd invite you to our next session, which is on April 14th. And we have a link there if you would like to RSVP and join us. And thank you so much for joining us today. It's afternoon.
Thank you, everybody. See you in the next session of the curriculum fair. Thanks for joining.